The rain drummed against my apartment window like impatient fingers, creating rivulets that caught the glow of my desk lamp. Organic chemistry equations blurred together on the page in front of me. Finals week had turned my brain into mush, and I'd been staring at the same molecular structure for 20 minutes, without absorbing a single bond angle. The sudden shrill of my phone cut through the white noise of the storm. 11:47 p.m. I glanced at the screen, expecting Jake's name. He'd been sending random updates from his study abroad program in Prague at all hours, forgetting about time zones. Instead, I saw Sarah Morgan. My thumb hesitated over the answer button. Jake's mom never called me directly, especially not this late. We'd exchanged pleasantries whenever I visited, sure, but she had her own life, her own friends. The phone rang again, more insistent. "Hello, Alex?" Her voice sounded different, smaller somehow, with an edge I'd never heard before. "I'm sorry to call so late. I didn't know who else to call. Just you. Please come over." The textbook slipped from my lap. In all the years I'd known Sarah Morgan, through countless dinners at their house, graduation parties, and family gatherings, I'd never heard her sound so broken. "Sarah, what's wrong? Are you okay? Can you come? Please." The vulnerability in those two words hit me square, in the chest. This was Jake's composed, elegant mother, the woman who hosted perfect dinner parties, who never had a hair out of place, who handled Jake's teenage disasters with grace and humor. She was asking me for help. I am on my way. I was already reaching for my keys. Before I'd finished speaking, the chemistry book tumbled to the floor, forgotten. The streets were slick with rain, reflecting the amber glow of streetlights in fractured patterns. My windshield wipers struggled against the downpour as I navigated the familiar route from campus to the Morgan house, a drive I'd made hundreds of times over the years. But never like this. Never with my heart hammering against my ribs and my mind racing through possibilities. What could have happened? Jake was safe in Europe. I'd gotten a photo of him at some Prague cafe just yesterday. An accident? Family emergency? The scenario spiraled through my head, each worse than the last, but underneath the worry was something else. Something I'd been trying to ignore for months now. Ever since Jake's parents had separated last spring, I'd found myself noticing things about Sarah that I'd never paid attention to before. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. How her eyes lit up when she talked about the book she was reading. The quiet sadness that had settled around her shoulders like a shawl since the divorce proceedings began. I'd chalked it up to sympathy at first. She was going through a difficult time, and I felt protective of the family. That had welcomed me like a son. But if I was honest, really honest, it had become something more complicated than that. Something I didn't want to examine too closely. The Morgan house appeared through the rain, its windows glowing warmly against the storm. I'd spent so many hours in that house that it felt like a second home. Jake and I had built countless blanket forts in the living room, stayed up too late playing video games in the basement, raided the kitchen for midnight snacks. Sarah had always been the steady presence in the background, making sure we had enough to eat, quietly cleaning up our messes, offering gentle advice when we needed it. Now, as I pulled into the driveway, the house felt different, significant. In a way I couldn't name, Sarah opened the door before I could knock, as if she'd been watching for my headlights. The sight of her stopped me cold. Her usually perfect composure was nowhere to be found. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, instead of in its typical neat style. Her eyes were red-rimmed, mascara slightly smudged. She was wearing an oversized sweater that made her look smaller, more fragile than I'd ever seen her. "Thank you for coming," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "I know it's late and you have finals. Don't worry about that." I shrugged out of my rain jacket, hanging it on the familiar hook by the door. "What's going on?" She led me into the living room, and I noticed the scattered tissues on the coffee table. The opened bottle of wine with only one glass beside it, the manila envelope lying open like an accusation. The room that had always felt so warm and welcoming now seemed hollow. To quiet without Jake's laugh echoing from somewhere in the house, Sarah sank onto the couch, pulling her knees up like she was trying to make herself disappear. "The papers came today. The final divorce decree. She gestured toward the envelope with a bitter smile. 15 years of marriage reduced to legal terminology and asset division. I settled onto the opposite end of the couch, maintaining what felt like a safe distance. I'm sorry, that must be really hard. She let out a shaky laugh. You know what the worst part is? I called 3 different friends before I called you, left voicemails. But everyone's busy with their own lives, their own families. And I realized, I've become that woman, the one whose social circle was really just her husband's social circle. The one who doesn't know how to exist outside of being someone's wife. The raw honesty in her voice made my chest tight. I'd seen Sarah as this pillar of strength for so long that witnessing her vulnerability felt both intimate and devastating. I tried calling Jake, she continued, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. But he's probably asleep, and I didn't want to ruin his semester with my drama. He shouldn't have to take care of his mother's emotional breakdown. It's not drama, I said quietly. It's your life falling apart. You're allowed to feel that. She looked up at me then, really looked at me, and something shifted in the air between us. Her eyes, usually so guarded, were completely open. For the first time, I wasn't seeing Jake's mom or the polished woman who hosted book clubs and charity fundraisers. I was seeing Sarah, just Sarah, raw and real and heartbreakingly human. The moment stretched longer than it should have. I found myself memorizing the way the lamplight caught the gold flecks in her brown eyes, the way her breath hitched when she realized I was staring back with equal intensity. We both seemed to recognize the dangerous territory we were entering. She looked away first, tucking that familiar strand of hair behind her ear. I'll make some tea, I said, standing up quickly. The good stuff you keep hidden from Jake? That earned me a small, genuine smile. Earl Grey. Top shelf in the pantry. Moving. Around her kitchen felt natural, automatic. I'd made late-night snacks here countless times, knew where she kept everything. But tonight, preparing tea for Sarah while she sat curled up in the living room felt different, more significant. I was crossing some invisible line I hadn't even known existed. When I returned with 2 steaming mugs, she'd composed herself somewhat, though her eyes were still glassy with unshed tears. Tell me about Prague, she said, clearly trying to steer the conversation to safer ground. Jake's last email was all about some girl he met at a cafe. So I told her about Jake's adventures, the photos he'd sent, the stories of getting lost in Czech Republic's winding streets, his terrible attempts at learning the language. We talked about school, about books, about anything except the obvious weight of what had happened between us in that moment of eye contact. But it hung there anyway. It's unspoken but undeniable. By the time we'd finished our tea, the rain had softened to a gentle patter against the windows. Sarah walked me to the door, both of us moving carefully like we were afraid any sudden movement might shatter something fragile. Thank you, she said softly, for coming, for listening, for not making me feel pathetic. You're not pathetic, I replied. You're human. For a moment, I thought she might hug me. Her body swayed slightly toward mine, and I found myself leaning forward in response. But then she caught herself, stepping back with a small, almost sad smile. Drive safely. The roads are slick. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As I walked to my car, I could feel her watching from the doorway. Waiting until I was safely inside before closing the door, the drive back to my apartment passed in a blur of rain and racing thoughts. I couldn't stop replaying that moment when our eyes had met, the electric recognition that had passed between us, the way my world had tilted slightly off its axis. This was Jake's mother, my best friend's mother, the woman who had packed my lunches when I'd forgotten mine, who had cheered at my high school graduation, who had always been safely categorized in my mind as family-adjacent, but sitting in my car, hands still trembling, slightly on the steering wheel, I couldn't deny what I'd felt. What I'd seen reflected in her eyes before we'd both looked away. Everything had changed in the space of a single evening. The question was, what was I going to do about it? The text arrived Friday morning while I was shelving returns at the campus. Bookstore. Thank you again for last night. Hope your finals go well. Sarai stared at the message for a full minute before responding. How are you feeling today? Reply came an hour later. Better. Strange how much difference it makes too. Feel heard. What started as simple check-ins evolved into something more over the weekend. Saturday brought another exchange sheet, seen a book review that reminded her of something we'd discussed. Sunday, I sent her a photo of a terrible coffee shop latte with the caption, "Missing your Earl Grey already." Her response was a laughing emoji followed by, "Come by Monday if you want. I'll make the real thing." I did come by Monday. And Tuesday. By Wednesday, I'd established a routine of stopping at the grocery store on my way to her house. Picking up small things, fresh bread, the good coffee she liked, flowers for no reason other than they'd make her smile. "You don't have to keep bringing things," she said Wednesday evening as I arranged daisies in a mason jar at her kitchen counter. "I know," I replied, "but I want to." She was quiet for a moment, watching me fuss with the flowers. It's been a long time since someone wanted to take care of me. The simple honesty in that statement made my chest ache. I wanted to say that. Her ex-husband was an idiot, that anyone would be lucky to take care of her. I was quickly becoming addicted to the way her face lit up when she opened the door and saw me standing there. Instead, I just nodded and asked if she needed help with anything around the house. That's how I found myself spending Thursday afternoon helping her tackle the overgrown garden beds, project she'd been putting off since the separation. Beside her in the afternoon sun, our hands occasionally brushing as we reached for tools, felt dangerously domestic. When she laughed at my complete inability to distinguish between weeds and actual plants, the sound went straight to my heart. "I feel like I'm playing hooky," Sarah said Tuesday afternoon, settling into the corner booth at the Daily Grind with her cappuccino. She'd texted me during my lunch break, asking if I wanted to grab coffee before my evening shift at the bookstore. From what? It's spring break for you too. From being a responsible adult, I suppose? She wrapped her hands around her mug like she was drawing warmth from it. I haven't done something just because I wanted to in, God, I don't even know how long. The cafe buzzed with the typical college crowd, students hunched over laptops. Study groups claiming tables with stacks of books, the eternal line of caffeine-dependent undergrads. But our corner felt separate from all of it, like weed carved. Out our own little world? What did you want to do? I asked. Before marriage, before Jake, when you were my age, what were your dreams? Her smile turned wistful. I wanted to write, not just lesson plans and book reports, but real writing. I had this fantasy of living in a tiny apartment in New York, surviving on ramen and determination while I worked on the great American novel. What? Happened. Life happened. I met David in college, got pregnant with Jake earlier than planned, and suddenly practical concerns took over. David was supportive, don't get me wrong, but someone had to be the steady one. Someone had to have the stable job and the sensible priorities. She took a sip of her coffee. I convinced myself I was being mature, sacrificing my silly dreams for real responsibility. They weren't silly dreams. No, she agreed quietly. I'm starting to realize they weren't. I found myself leaning forward, drawn into her orbit. Not too late, you know. You're 35, not 95. Sometimes I feel 95, she laughed, but there was something brittle in it. What about you? It keeps you up at night worrying about the future. The question caught me off guard. Most people my age assumed I had it all figured out, or at least pretended I did. But something about Sarah's openness made me want to be equally honest. Everything, I admitted. I'm graduating in 6 weeks and I have no idea what comes next. Everyone expects me to have some grand plan. But the truth is I'm terrified I'll make the wrong choice and end up trapped in a life that doesn't fit. Like I did. I didn't mean. No, you're right. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing against mine. That's exactly what I did. I chose safety over passion, and it took me 15 years to realize how much of myself I'd lost in the process. Her hand was still, touching mine. Neither of us moved to break the contact, though I was hyper-aware of the warmth of her skin. The way her thumb absently traced across my knuckles as she spoke. The difference is, you know, it's a trap, she continued. That awareness is everything. You won't make my mistakes. How can you be so sure? Because you came to my house at midnight in the rain just because I asked you to. Because you bring me flowers for no reason. because you see people really see them in a way most people don't. Her eyes met mine, and I felt that same electric recognition from the night she'd called me. You have a heart that pays attention, Alex. That's rarer than you think. We sat like that for a moment, her hand on mine, the rest of the cafe fading into background noise. I wanted to turn my palm up, to interlace our fingers properly, to acknowledge what was happening between us. But even as the thought formed, reality crashed back in. This was Jake's mother. This was 15 years older than me. This was complicated in ways I wasn't sure I could handle, but when she finally pulled her hand away, I immediately missed the contact. The walk to her car turned into 20 minutes of continued conversation in the parking lot. We talked about books, about the strange loneliness of being surrounded by people who didn't really know you, about the courage it took to start over. By the time she finally got in her car, the sun was setting, and I realized I'd completely forgotten about my shift at the bookstore. You cannot survive on ramen and energy bars forever, Sarah declared Saturday evening, surveying the contents of my grocery bag with mock horror. Come on, I'm teaching you to cook actual food. Her kitchen smelled like garlic and herbs, wine glasses already waiting on the counter beside ingredients I couldn't identify. She'd changed from her usual elegant outfits into jeans and a sweater that made her look younger, more approachable. I can cook, I protested weakly. Heating frozen pizza doesn't count. She handed me a glass of red wine and gestured toward the cutting board. We're making real pasta. From scratch. I'd been in this kitchen hundreds of times, but never as Sarah's sous chef. She moved around the space with easy confidence, explaining techniques while I struggled to julienne vegetables without losing fingers. When I inevitably made a mess of the onions, she stepped behind me, her hands covering mine to guide the knife. Like this, she murmured, and I could feel her breath against my ear. Let the knife do the work. The simple instruction became infinitely more complicated with her body pressed against my back, her hands warm over mine. I found myself leaning into her touch, hyper-aware of every point of contact. Better, she said, but she didn't step away immediately. For a moment, we stood frozen like that, her chin nearly resting on my shoulder, both of us breathing a little too carefully. Then the timer for the pasta water went off, and breaking the spell. Dinner was a revelation, not just the food, which was incredible, but the easy domesticity of it all. Sarah told stories about Jake's childhood catastrophes while I helped clean up. Our movements synchronized like we'd been cooking together for years. The wine made everything feel softer, more intimate. He was such a serious little boy, she was saying, drying a plate while I washed. He used to make elaborate plans for everything. I'd find detailed schedules for his summer vacation taped to his bedroom wall. He still does that, I laughed. You should see his itinerary for Prague. It's color-coded. I know exactly where he gets it from. David was the same way. Her expression grew thoughtful. Sometimes I wonder if that's why our marriage failed. It's too much planning, not enough spontaneity. We scheduled our lives so efficiently that we forgot to actually live them. We'd moved to the living room, settling on the couch with our wine glasses. Somehow we'd ended up closer than before, not quite touching, but close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in her eyes, could catch the subtle scent of her perfume. Is that what you want now? I asked. Spontaneity? I think so. I want to make decisions based on what feels right instead of what looks right on paper. She turned to face me more fully, and I realized my pulse had quickened. I want to take risks again. The weight of her words hung between us. We both knew we weren't just talking about her post-divorce life anymore. We were dancing around something bigger, something that scared and thrilled me in equal measure. Sarah, I started, not sure what I intended to say. She must have heard. Something in my voice, because her expression shifted, becoming more guarded. It's getting late. Should probably. Yeah, I agreed quickly, though the last thing I wanted was to leave. Early morning tomorrow. Went to the door. Both of us moving carefully again, like we had that first night. But this time, when we said goodbye, there was an acknowledgement in her eyes that matched what I was feeling. We were falling into something, and we both knew it. I still can't believe you're actually teaching yourself Italian, I was saying. The following Tuesday evening, sprawled on Sarah's couch while she graded papers at the other end. We'd fallen into this comfortable routine, me studying while she worked. Occasionally sharing observations or asking questions. It felt natural, domestic in the best possible way. I figure if I'm going to have my midlife crisis, I might well, do it properly, she replied, not looking up from the essay she was marking. Eat, pray, love, and all that. Are you planning to run away to Italy? Maybe. Would you miss me? The question was casual, but something in her tone made me look up from my textbook. She was watching me over her reading glasses, and there was something vulnerable in her expression. Yes, I said simply. I would. We looked at each other for a moment, the air thick with unspoken implications. Then her laptop chimed with an incoming video call, and Jake's face filled the screen. Mom? He called out cheerfully, his image pixelated but unmistakably happy. You'll never guess what happened today, Alex. Dude, what are you doing there? Stomach dropped. Sarah and I exchanged a quick glance before I forced a casual smile and moved into the camera's range. Man, just studying with your mom. She's helping me with some stuff for graduation. That's awesome. Jake's grin was infectious, completely unaware of the tension he'd interrupted. Mom, you didn't tell me Alex was coming by so much. It's so cool that you guys are hanging out. It's been very helpful, Sarah managed, her voice only slightly strained. How's Prague? For the next 20 minutes, we maintained the charade of normalcy, while Jake regaled us with stories of his latest adventures. I chimed in at appropriate moments, asked the right questions, acted like the best friend I'd always been. I was hyper-aware of Sarah beside me, of how careful we both had to be with our words and expressions. I'm so glad you're looking after Mom, Alex, Jake said as the call was winding down. It makes me feel better about being so far away, knowing she's not alone. Of course, I replied, the words feeling like stones in my mouth. That's what friends do. After we said our goodbyes and Jake's face disappeared from the screen, the silence in the room was deafening. Sarah closed the laptop with more force than necessary, and we both sat there, staring at nothing. Oh, this is complicated, isn't it? She said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I turned to face her fully, seeing my own conflict reflected in her eyes. Yes, but I don't want to stop. The admission hung between us like a confession. Sarah's breath caught, and for a moment, I thought she might say we had to stop, that this was too dangerous, too wrong. Instead, she reached for my hand, interlacing our fingers properly for the first time. I don't want to stop either, she whispered. God help me, but I don't want to stop either. The weather service had been predicting severe storms all week, but nothing could have prepared us for the fury that descended on the city that Thursday evening. I was in my apartment, half-heartedly reviewing for my final organic chemistry exam, when the first crack of thunder shook the building so violently that my coffee mug rattled against my desk. The lights flickered once, twice, then died completely. In the sudden darkness, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Power's out here. 2. A little scared. The storm is intense. I was already reaching for my emergency kit before I'd finished reading. Living in tornado country had taught me to be prepared. I kept a bag stocked with flashlights, batteries, and a weather radio. More than that, the thought of Sarah alone in that big house during a storm like this made my chest tight with worry. On my way. Have supplies. The drive to her house was treacherous. Rain hammered my windshield faster than the wipers could clear it, and branches littered the roads. When lightning illuminated the sky, I could see trees bending at impossible angles there. Leaves stripped away by the wind. By the time I reached Sarah's street, half the neighborhood was dark, and I had to navigate around a downed power line to reach her driveway. She opened the door before I could knock, her face pale in the glow. Of a single candle? You're insane for driving in this, she said, but the relief in her voice was unmistakable. She pulled me inside, her hands briefly gripping my arms as if to reassure herself I was real. Good thing I'm insane then. I hefted my emergency bag. I brought light, entertainment, and terrible battery-powered coffee. The house felt different in the candlelights, smaller, more intimate. Shadows danced on the walls as we set up a command center in the kitchen, flashlights positioned strategically around the room. The battery radio crackled with weather updates. Tornado watch extended until midnight, widespread power outages, Residents advised to stay indoors. Well, Sarah said, attempting lightness, I guess you're stuck here for a while. Something in her tone made me look at her more closely. She was trying to appear calm, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers worried. At the hem of her sweater, "Hey," I said softly, "are you okay?" I mean, besides the obvious, she let out a shaky laugh. Hate storms, always have. David used to make fun of me for it said it was irrational for a grown woman to be afraid of. A little weather. She gestured at the windows, where rain lashed the glass like angry tears. This is not a little weather. It's not irrational, I said firmly. This storm is genuinely dangerous. Being scared is the reasonable response. The way she looked at me, then like I'd given her permission to feel what she was feeling, made something shift in my chest. How long had she been apologizing for her own emotions? We made dinner by candlelight, working together to prepare something simple from the ingredients she had on hand. The flickering flames turned the mundane task of making pasta into something magical. Every movement felt heightened, more significant. When our hands accidentally touched, reaching for the same pot, when she laughed at my terrible jokes, when lightning illuminated her face in stark relief, it all felt like we were existing in some alternate reality where the normal rules didn't apply. "Can I ask you something?" she said, as we settled at her kitchen table with our plates. The candles between us cast golden light across her features, making her look younger, softer. "Anything. Do you ever wonder about the sliding doors? Moments in your life? The tiny decisions that completely change your trajectory?" I twirled pasta around my fork, considering. Like what? Like if I hadn't gotten pregnant with Jake when I did, if I'd been braver about my writing, if I'd said no to the first date. With David, because I had a paper to finish. She took a sip of wine weed, opened a bottle since we weren't going anywhere. I think about it sometimes. What my life would look like if I'd made different choices. Do you regret it, having Jake? God, no. Never. Her answer was immediate, fierce. Jake is the best thing I've ever done. But I do wonder sometimes who I might have been if I'd trusted myself more. If I'd been less afraid of making mistakes. Lightning crashed outside, so close that the thunder was instantaneous. Sarah flinched, and without thinking, I reached across the table to cover her hand. With mine, "You're not the same person you were at 21, I said. "You can still make different choices. Can I at 35 with a son and a mortgage and a sensible job?" But she didn't pull her hand away. "Sometimes I feel like I'm sleepwalking through my own life." "You don't seem like you're sleepwalking when you're with me." The words slipped out before I could stop them. Sarah's eyes widened, and I realized I'd crossed another invisible line. But instead of pulling back, I found myself leaning forward. "Look forward to your visits more than I should," she whispered. "More than is appropriate for a woman my age, with a son your age." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Sarah, I think about you constantly," I said, the confession tumbling out like water through a broken dam. "I know it's wrong, I know it's complicated, but I can't help it. I think about your laugh and the way you tuck your hair behind your ear when you're concentrating, and how you make me feel like the most interesting person in the world when you listen to me talk. I know I shouldn't feel this way, but I can't make it stop." The silence that followed my confession was broken only by the storm raging outside. Sarah stared at me, her lips slightly parted, and I was sure I'd ruined everything. I started to pull my hand away, to apologize, to take it all back. Instead, she tightened her grip on my fingers. "We should go sit somewhere more comfortable," she said quietly. "This storm isn't ending anytime soon." We moved to the living room, bringing candles and wine glasses with us. The couch suddenly felt enormous and impossibly small at the same time. We sat facing each other, close enough that our knees almost touched, far enough apart that we weren't technically crossing any physical boundaries. "Alex," she began, then stopped, shaking her head. "I don't know what to say. This is lightning." Illuminated the room in stark white light, followed immediately by thunder so loud it seemed to shake the house to its foundation. Sarah gasped, instinctively moving closer to me, and suddenly we were sitting much nearer, her hand pressed against my chest. "It's okay," I murmured, though my heart was racing for reasons that had nothing to do with the storm. "We're safe. But we weren't safe. Not really. Not from this thing building between us. Not from the way she was looking at me in the candlelight. It's not from the electricity that had nothing to do with the lightning outside. Slowly, carefully, she reached up and touched my face, her fingertips tracing the line of my jaw. "You're so young," she whispered, but there was wonder in her voice rather than rejection. "Age is just a number," I replied, covering her hand with mine. Pressing it more firmly against my cheek, we leaned toward each other like we were magnetized, drawn by forces beyond our control. Her eyes fluttered closed, and I could feel her breath against my lips. Another second, maybe two, and we would cross the final line. The shrill ring of her landline cut through the moment like a blade. We sprang apart, both breathing hard. Sarah stared at the phone in confusion. Who even had her landline number anymore? Before finally answering, "Hello. Yes, this is Sarah Morgan. Oh, the power outage check. Yes, we're fine. Thank you for calling." When she hung up, we sat in awkward silence, the spell thoroughly broken. The candles flickered between us, and I could see my own confusion and desire reflected in her eyes. "That was emergency services," she said unnecessarily. "Checking on residents due to the power outages." "That's good. Good that they're checking." We both knew we were being ridiculous, talking around what had almost happened. But neither of us seemed capable of addressing it directly. The moment had been too big, too significant to process in real time. "It's late," she said finally, "and the roads are still dangerous. You should stay. I can take the couch." Of course, the couch. I woke to the smell of coffee and sunlight streaming through windows. The storm had passed sometime during the night, leaving behind that clean, washed scent that comes after heavy rain. For a moment, I was disoriented. This wasn't my apartment. And the couch I was lying on was too comfortable to be the one in my living room. Then memory crashed back. The storm, the dinner, the almost kiss. Sarah, I could hear her moving around in the kitchen, the familiar sounds of morning routine. When I sat up, my back protesting the night spent on the couch, I saw her through the doorway. She was dressed for work in a navy blouse and dark pants, her hair pulled back in its usual professional style. The candle-lit goddess from last night had been replaced by the composed woman I'd known for years. "Good morning," I said, padding into the kitchen in my wrinkled clothes from yesterday. "Morning." She didn't quite meet my eyes, busying herself with pouring coffee into 2 mugs. Power came back around 3 a.m. I made breakfast eggs, toast. Hope that's okay. The formality in her voice was like a physical barrier between us. We sat at the same kitchen table where we'd shared wine and confessions just hours before. But it might as well have been a different universe. "Sarah," I started, then stopped when she flinched slightly at my tone. "Maybe you shouldn't come around so much," she said abruptly, still not looking at me. I think we both got caught up in the moment last night. The storm, the wine, the unusual circumstances. Okay. But in the light of day, it's clear that we need to maintain appropriate boundaries. Each word felt like a small wound. I watched her retreat behind the professional mask she wore at school, at social functions, in all the places where she had to be, Jake's mother and nothing else. "Are you saying this because you don't think it's appropriate?" I asked carefully. "Or are you saying it because you feel it too?" Finally, she looked at me. Her composure cracked just enough for me to see the turmoil underneath. "I'm saying it because I do feel it," she whispered. "And that terrifies me." The honest admission hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we should cross. Sarah's coffee sat untouched, growing cold as we stared at each other across the table. "What are we doing, Alex?" she asked finally. "What is this?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I know I don't want to pretend it isn't happening." She closed her eyes, and I watched her wage some internal battle. When she opened them again, there was a new resolve in her expression. "Come with me," she said. She led me through the sliding glass doors to her back garden. The storm had left. Its mark scattered leaves, a few broken branches, but also a fresh clarity to the air and an almost supernatural green to the grass. We sat on the wooden bench she'd placed under her favorite oak tree, the same tree where Jake and I had built. A treehouse when we were 12? I need to say something, she began, and I need you to let me get through it without interrupting. I nodded, settling back against the bench to listen. I've been married for 15 years to a good man who never really saw me, not the real me. He saw the version of me that was useful to him, the wife, the mother, the woman who could host dinner parties and manage his social calendar. But the part of me that dreams, that creates, that has her own wants and fears and passions, that woman has been invisible for so long that I started to think she didn't exist anymore. She turned to face me more fully, and I could see tears gathering in her eyes. Then you started coming around more often, and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to be seen, really seen. You asked me about my thoughts, my dreams, my opinions on things that have nothing to do with anyone else's needs. When you look at me, I don't feel like Jake's mother or David's ex-wife. I feel like Sarah. You are Sarah? I said softly. You've always been Sarah. But I'm also 35 years old, with a son who's your age. I'm your best friend's mother. People will think God. What will Jake think? What will everyone think? I reached for her hands, holding them gently in mine. Can I ask you something? When you're with me, do you feel like you're pretending to be someone you're not? She shook her head immediately. No, that's just it. I feel more like myself than I have in years. Then why should it matter what other people think? Why should their judgment be more important than your happiness? Because the world doesn't work that way, Alex. Because there are consequences to choices like this. Because I could lose Jake. Lose my job. Lose everything I've worked to build. Or, I said carefully, you could gain something worth all of that risk. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us wrestling with the magnitude of what we were discussing. Mockingbirds sang somewhere above us, and I could hear the distant sound of neighbors beginning their Saturday morning routines. I'm scared, she whispered finally. So am I. But I'm more scared of walking away from this and spending the rest of my life wondering what if. She looked at me then with such naked vulnerability that my breath caught. What if we hurt Jake? What if we hurt each other? What if we don't? What if this is exactly what we both need? For a long moment, she just stared at me, searching my face for something. Then slowly, she leaned forward and kissed me. It wasn't the passionate, desperate kiss I'd imagined during all those nights lying awake thinking about her. It was tender, careful, full of question marks and ellipses. Her lips were soft against mine. She tasted like coffee and possibilities. When we broke apart, she rested her forehead against mine. This changes everything, she breathed. I know. We have to be careful. So careful. If Jake finds out before we figure out how to tell him if the wrong people see us together, we'll be careful, I promised. We'll figure it out as we go. She pulled back to look at me again, and this time her smile was real, unguarded. I can't believe I'm doing this, she said, but there was wonder in her voice rather than regret. We're doing this, I corrected, and kissed her again, deeper this time, with more certainty, when we finally broke apart. The sun was fully up, and I could hear the sounds of a world returning to normal after the storm. But for us, sitting in her garden with our hands intertwined and the taste of each other still on our lips, everything had changed. We were no longer just Alex and Sarah, Jake's friend and Jake's mother. We were something new, something complicated, and beautiful and terrifying. We were us. The weeks following our first kiss became a masterclass in careful choreography. We developed an intricate dance of stolen moments and coded communications. Each interaction planned with the precision of a military operation. My phone buzzed with seemingly innocent messages. The bookstore got that anthology you mentioned. I thought you might want to borrow it. Come over when you can. Thanks for helping with the garden yesterday. The roses look much better. Translation, I'm thinking about you. We met for coffee at 7 a.m. at a cafe across town before the world was properly awake. Sarah would arrive first, always choosing the corner table facing away from the street. I'd slip in 5 minutes later. We'd have 30 precious minutes before she had to leave for school, and I had to open the bookstore. This feels very cloak and dagger, she whispered one morning, her fingers brushing mine as she handed me. A sugar packet? Is that a complaint? Surprisingly, no. Her smile was secret, conspiratorial. I never thought I'd enjoy being mysterious. Evening walks became our refuge. The park near her house had winding trails that offered privacy. And we'd meet there as the sun set, maintaining careful distance until we were sure we were alone. Only then would she slip her hand into mine, and we'd walk like any normal couple, talking about our days, our hopes, the books we were reading. I keep wanting to tell someone, she admitted one evening, as we sat on a secluded bench. Not for advice or approval, just, I want to say out loud that I'm happy. Someone makes me feel like myself again. You're telling me you're not? Someone, though. You're the someone. The distinction made my chest warm with something deeper than just affection. I was falling in love with her, had probably been falling since that first night she called me in tears. But hearing the wonder in her voice when she talked about us made it real in a way that took my breath away. 3 weeks into our carefully hidden relationship, we made our first mistake. Sarah had suggested dinner at a small Italian place on the other side of town, somewhere we'd be unlikely to run into anyone we knew. We were deep in conversation about a novel she'd assigned her students when I saw her face change, her eyes widening slightly as she looked over my shoulder. What's wrong? I started to turn around. Don't look, she hissed, her hand shooting across the table to grab mine. Carol Martinez from school just walked in. She teaches in the classroom next to mine. My stomach dropped. We were sitting close together, hands touching across a candlelit table. There was no way to make this look like anything other than what it was. Bathroom, Sarah said quickly. Go to the bathroom for a few minutes. I'll handle this. I stood and walked calmly toward the back of the restaurant, my heart hammering. From the bathroom doorway, I watched Sarah wave at her colleague with a bright smile, gesturing toward the empty seat across from her as if she'd been dining alone. When I emerged 10 minutes later, Carol was gone, and Sarah was pale but composed. She bought it, she said quietly. Said she was impressed that I was finally getting out and doing things for myself. Asked if I was meeting someone, and I said I was waiting for a friend who had to cancel last minute. But the incident shook us both. We drove separately back to her house, and I waited 15 minutes before knocking on her door. Even then, we were jumpy, hyper-aware of every sound from the street. A week later, we had an even closer call. I was at Sarah's house on a Tuesday evening. We'd fallen into a routine of quiet nights together, reading in the same room, occasionally sharing observations about our books. It felt beautifully domestic, like a preview of what a real relationship with her might look like. That's when Jake's face appeared on her laptop screen without warning. Mom, surprise video call? He announced cheerfully, his pixelated grin filling the screen. I dove behind the couch so fast I nearly gave myself a whiplash, landing hard on the floor while Sarah fumbled to angle the laptop away from where I'd been. Sitting, Jake. Honey, what a surprise. How's Prague? For the next 20 minutes, I lay cramped behind her couch, listening to them chat about his classes, his new friends, his plans for the weekend. My leg fell asleep, and I had to bite my lip to keep from making noise when I tried to shift position. Is someone there with you? Jake asked at one point, and my blood turned to ice water. What? No, just me. Why? I thought I heard something. Like someone moving around. Probably just the cat next door, Sarah said smoothly. You know how thin these walls are? After she finally said goodbye and closed the laptop, we sat in shaken silence. The stress of the close calls was beginning to wear on both of us. I can't keep doing this, Sarah said quietly, her head in her hands. The lying, the constant vigilance, the fear of being caught, it's exhausting. Are you saying you want to stop? She looked up at me, and I could see the conflict written across her face. I'm saying I don't know how sustainable this is. It happens when Jake comes home? How long can we keep meeting in secret like teenagers? I didn't have good answers for her questions. We both knew it. The call came on a Thursday morning while I was restocking the biography section at the bookstore. Jake's name on my phone screen usually brought a smile to my face, but lately, every contact with him felt loaded with guilt. Alex, dude, I have news. Good news or bad news? Good news. I'm coming home early. Like next week early. Want to be there for your graduation. The books I'd been holding scattered to the floor. Next week I thought you weren't coming back. Until June. I was going to stay for the summer program, but Mom's been through so much with the divorce. I realized I've been a terrible son, gallivanting around Europe while she's dealing with everything alone. Plus your graduation is huge. I couldn't miss that. My throat felt tight. That's great, Jake. Really great. I haven't told Mom yet. I want it to be a surprise. You're the first person I've called. After I hung up, I sat on the floor of the bookstore among the scattered books, my mind racing.
Next week?
Jake would be home next week, and Sarah and I would have to pretend that nothing had changed between us. We'd have to go back to being exactly what we'd always been, his mother and his best friend. Nothing more. I called Sarah immediately. He's coming home, I said without preamble when she answered. There was a long pause. When? Next week. He wants to surprise you. Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice was carefully controlled. How do you feel about that? Terrified, I admitted. Happy for you, but terrified for us. I'm happy he's coming home, she said quietly. He's my son, and I've missed him terribly. But Alex, I don't know how we're going to do this. Graduation day dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring morning that made everything feel possible. I'd been awake since 5 a.m., nervous energy making sleep impossible. Today Jake would see Sarah and me together for the first time since we'd become whatever we were. I spotted them in the crowd as soon as I walked across the stage. Jake was easy to find. He'd grown a beard in Europe and looked older, more mature. But it was Sarah who made me stumble slightly as I accepted my diploma. She was beaming with pride, and for a moment, I forgot that her smile was supposed to be maternal rather than romantic. Alex. Jake caught me in a bear hug as soon as the ceremony ended. Oh, you did it, man. College graduate. Still can't quite believe it, I replied, trying to match his enthusiasm while hyper-aware of Sarah standing just behind him. I'm so proud of you, she said, and there was something in her tone that made Jake glance between us curiously. Group photo, Jake announced, pulling out his phone. This moment needs to be documented. The three of us posed together, Jake in the middle with his arms around both of us. I tried to look natural, but I was painfully conscious of every micro-expression. Every gesture that might give us away. When Sarah's hand briefly touched my back as Jake took the photo, it felt like an electric shock. Don't look, she hissed, her hand shooting across the table to grab mine. Carol Martinez from school just walked in. She teaches in the classroom next to mine. My stomach dropped. We were sitting close together, hands touching across a candlelit table. There was no way to make this look like anything other than what it was. Bathroom, Sarah said quickly. Go to the bathroom for a few minutes. I'll handle this. I stood and walked calmly toward the back of the restaurant, my heart hammering. From the bathroom doorway, I watched Sarah wave at her colleague with a bright smile, gesturing toward the empty seat across from her as if she'd been dining alone. When I emerged 10 minutes later, Carol was gone, and Sarah was pale but composed. She bought it, she said quietly. Said she was impressed that I was finally getting out and doing things for myself. Asked if I was meeting someone, and I said I was waiting for a friend who had to cancel last minute. But the incident shook us both. We drove separately back to her house, and I waited 15 minutes before knocking on her door. Even then, we were jumpy, hyper-aware of every sound from the street. A week later, we had an even closer call. I was at Sarah's house on a Tuesday evening. We'd fallen into a routine of quiet nights together, reading in the same room, occasionally sharing observations about our books. It felt beautifully domestic, like a preview of what a real relationship with her might look like. That's when Jake's face appeared on her laptop screen without warning. Mom, surprise video call, he announced cheerfully, his pixelated grin filling the screen. I dove behind the couch so fast I nearly gave myself whiplash,
House.
landing hard on the floor while Sarah fumbled to angle the laptop away from where I'd been. Sitting, Jake, honey, what a surprise. How's Prague? For the next 20 minutes, I lay cramped behind her couch, listening to them chat about his classes, his new friends, his plans for the weekend. My leg fell asleep and I had to bite my lip to keep from making noise when I tried to shift position. Is someone there with you? Jake asked at one point, and my blood turned to ice water. What? No, just me. Why? I thought I heard something. Like someone moving around. Probably just the cat next door, Sarah said smoothly. You know how thin these walls are. After she finally said goodbye and closed the laptop, we sat in shaken silence. The stress of the close calls was beginning to wear on both of us. I can't keep doing this, Sarah said quietly, her head in her hands. The lying, the constant vigilance, the fear of being caught, it's exhausting. Are you saying you want to stop? She looked up at me and I could see the conflict written across her face. I'm saying I don't know how sustainable this is. It happens when Jake comes home? How long can we keep meeting in secret like teenagers? I didn't have good answers for her questions. We both knew it. The call came on a Thursday morning while I was restocking the biography section at the bookstore. Jake's name on my phone screen usually brought a smile to my face, but lately every contact with him felt loaded with guilt. Alex, dude, I have news. Good news or bad news? Good news. I'm coming home early. Like, next week early. I want to be there for your graduation. The books I'd been holding scattered to the floor. Next week I thought you weren't coming back. Until June. I was going to stay for the summer program, but Mom's been through so much with the divorce, and I realized I've been a terrible son, gallivanting around Europe while she's dealing with everything alone. Plus, your graduation is huge. I couldn't miss that. My throat felt tight. That's great, Jake. Really great. I haven't told Mom yet. I want it to be a surprise. You're the first person I've called. After I hung up, I sat on the floor. Of the bookstore among the scattered books, my mind racing. Jake would be home next week, and Sarah and I would have to pretend that nothing had changed between us. We'd have to go back to being exactly what we'd always been, his mother and his best friend. Nothing more. I called Sarah immediately. He's coming home, I said, without preamble when she answered. There was a long pause. When? Next week. He wants to surprise you. Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice was carefully controlled. How do you feel about that? Terrified, I admitted. Happy for you, but terrified for us. I'm happy he's coming home, she said quietly. He's my son, and I've missed him terribly. But Alex, I don't know how we're going to do this. Graduation day dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring morning that made everything feel possible. I'd been awake since 5 a.m., nervous energy making sleep impossible. Today, Jake would see Sarah and me together for the first time since we'd become whatever we were. I spotted them in the crowd as soon as I walked across the stage. Jake was easy to find. He'd grown a beard in Europe and looked older, more mature. But it was Sarah who made me stumble slightly as I accepted my diploma. Was beaming with pride, and for a moment I forgot that her smile was supposed to be maternal rather than romantic. Alex. Jake caught me in a bear hug as soon as the ceremony ended. You did it, man? College graduate? Still can't quite believe it, I replied, trying to match his enthusiasm while hyper-aware of Sarah standing just behind him. I'm so proud of you, she said, and there was something in her tone that made Jake glance between us curiously. Group photo, Jake announced, pulling out his phone. This moment needs to be documented. The three of us posed together, Jake in the middle with his arms around both of us. I tried to look natural, but I was painfully conscious of every micro-expression, every gesture that might give us away. When Sarah's hand briefly touched my back as Jake took the photo, it felt like an electric shock later. During the reception, I found myself watching Sarah from across the room. She was talking to other parents, playing her role perfectly. But I caught her glancing at me when she thought no one was looking. When our eyes met, her smile was soft, private, meant only for me. Mom seems different, Jake said, appearing at my elbow with 2 cups of punch. Happier, maybe? More like herself again. My heart skipped. Different how? I don't know. Lighter somehow. Like she's not carrying as much weight on her shoulders. He studied her thoughtfully. I was worried about her while I was gone, but whatever she's been doing to heal from the divorce, it's working. If only he knew, I thought, accepting the punch with what I hoped was a casual smile. The graduation party at Sarah's house finally wound down around 11 p.m. Jake, jet-lagged and exhausted from the long day, had crashed on the living room couch an hour earlier. Sarah and I moved quietly around the kitchen, cleaning up the remnants of celebration. It was a good party, I said softly, loading dishes into the dishwasher. It was perfect. She handed me a stack of plates, her fingers brushing mine in the transfer. You looked so happy up there today. So proud of yourself. I was happy. I am happy. I paused in my work, looking at her directly. Not just about graduating. We both glanced toward the living room, where Jake's gentle snoring provided a soundtrack. To our conversation, we need to talk about what happens now, Sarah said quietly. With Jake home, with you starting your job in the fall, what this means for us? I dried my hands on the dish towel, considering my words carefully. What do you want it to mean? I want ... She stopped, started again. I want to keep seeing you. I want to keep being with you. But I also want to be honest with my son eventually. When the time is right, I want to stop living in secret. That could take time. A lot of time, I know. And it might not work out the way we hope. Jake might not understand. Other people definitely won't understand. We might lose things that matter to us. I stepped closer to her, close enough to touch, but not quite doing it yet. Are you willing to take that risk? She reached up and cupped my face in her hands, the gesture achingly familiar now. For you? For us? Yes. I kissed her then, soft and careful, mindful of Jake sleeping one room away. When we broke apart, she smiled, not the careful, measured, the smile she wore in public, but the real one that transformed her entire face. I should go, I whispered. I know. But neither of us moved for a moment, reluctant to break the spell of this quiet intimacy. Tomorrow? She asked. Tomorrow. I slipped out the back door, the way we'd practiced during our weeks of secrecy. But as I reached my car, I looked back to see her silhouetted in the kitchen window, watching me leave. She raised her hand in a small wave, and I knew without a doubt that this wasn't goodbye. Some love stories don't fit neat categories. Some love grows in the spaces between what's expected and what's real, flourishing in stolen moments and whispered conversations. And sometimes, the most precious connections are the ones we guard most carefully. Not because we're ashamed of them, but because we understand how rare and fragile they are. Sarah and I had found something worth protecting, worth the complexity and the risk. As I drove home through the quiet streets, I carried with me the promise in her smile and the certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. The story was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning.